This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Jeff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. Nadishani Perera, welcome back to Human Coined.
Thank you, Jeff. Nice to be back.
Good to see you again.
Yes, very much.
And part of the motivation for reconnecting today was that you recently stepped down after being Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka for 4 years during a crucial time, a pivotal time in Sri Lanka's history. How does it feel to be a private citizen again?
Well, Jeff, I'm kind of still getting used to it. It's been a very unique 4 years of my life, almost like I think would always be so special in my life. Somewhat looking back, I'm wondering how I even managed to survive some of it because it has been on a personal level extremely stressful, but not but also very rewarding. It's so there's a toll on your body, on your mind. You're like 24/7. It's like you have a huge burden on you, also because you're like taking the entire country's anti-corruption problems on your shoulders, sort of, because we really wanted to be responsive. But it all has a toll. I mean, I'm a mom. I have my family. It's not easy to manage all of that.
Absolutely.
But also some of the things we achieved, like the collective efforts, getting others on board and doing things together, which has happened like for the first time, I hear in Sri Lanka. All of that meant a lot of effort for the person who's pushing it and who's kind of getting it going. It's a lot of relationships. It's like all of these collective efforts. The meetings all happen like after 7 p.m., 8 p.m. because people have to finish their office work to find time for the collective, out of the box, radical advocacy efforts to discuss, to have those brainstorming meetings. So, yeah, but looking back, it's very rewarding, but I'm still getting used to it. It's like suddenly a big change. Yes.
So what do you think TI Sri Lanka was able to accomplish in the 4 years that you were at the helm? What was your sort of crowning accomplishment?
Yeah, I think a couple of them I would like to say is that in terms of the public interest litigation or filing cases on behalf of the people, the fundamental rights cases that we filed proved to be very, very impactful. Now, we do a whole host of things in terms of fighting corruption. We have the prevention angle, so that it involves all the education, the awareness raising, working with companies, to citizens, to organizations to set up things, mechanisms. But then we have some things which are about what happens if you've already committed corruption or you're about to commit and some whistleblowers actually tell us that information. Then you have the opportunity again to prevent or accountability, something that Sri Lanka deeply lacks, the accountability. One key case that I would like to mention is the case against the former president, the finance minister, as in the former, as in the Rajapaksa, and asking the court to hold them accountable for the economic crisis. And of course, there were a few other petitioners. One thing unique that we bring by going to court is that we talk about it. We do advocacy around it. There are some legal restrictions once you go to court, but within that framework, we let people know that this is why we went to court and this is the issue. And so that is like that versus an individual person going to court, they don't have that platform. So that's why sometimes we have chosen, while some individuals were going to court, to also back them and to go and file our case, because there are two things. One thing is that advocacy, communication, public awareness. But secondly, there is a lot of weight we see that the court gives when TISL, that is known as an anti-corruption expert organization, comes and says, this is corruption. This is a violation of the law. So this is why. So and when we got the judgment in our favor last year, last quarter, it was a landmark judgment. It was unique, and I think it's more than anything a deterrent. It will be a deterrent for future leaders, because you know that you cannot now get away saying, Sri Lankan senior people have got away saying, I don't know, I can't remember. That's it,
Right.
right?
Right.
And now this is not even like you engaging in a crime, like you killing somebody, or this is about you are accountable. It's a higher level. You should have taken proper economic advice and prevented the country's foreign reserves from hitting a zero. But you did not prevent it. The court got the Auditor General's Department to give a lot of documents and scrutinize all the correspondence that happened between the president and the monetary board. And it's not about, it wasn't an easy decision. But to then say that a country's bankruptcy was caused because you violated the public trust doctrine, that was wonderful to hear, because the public trust doctrine is something that we've tried to create awareness among people, that the public officials and the public representatives hold public property in trust for the people. They are not the owners, they are only the stewards. And they can only take decisions in the best interest of the people. And the moment they fail to do that and take a decision that helps them at the cost of the nation, that's actually abuse of power and that's corruption. But also you have violated the public trust that was entrusted. So that was a beautiful explanation also by the court itself. So after that, some people are a little sad that court didn't order compensation. Perhaps this was a big step itself. Now, it didn't stop individuals who can directly show that they suffered loss due to the economic crisis from going to court. And one person has gone to court saying that he lost his business, and that case is going on. However, that's why I say the bigger impact is the deterrent, because after that, all over newspapers and media, you saw people, journalists going to town trying to simplify what the judges meant. And it ended up actually to the extent that there was a term that was said in Sinhalese, where these people who were held responsible were called, translated means economic assassins. So it's very strong, and it messed up actually their future, their political plan to come back to power. And as a result, it made them very upset, and we had to face some repercussions. That's keeping that aside. We did this for the country. We had nothing personal against them. We don't want our leaders to be so careless and reckless and then get away with it, making a country suffer so much. And other than the big suffering that you knew about our country, like the queues and the whole economy, do you know, Jeff, that several people died while staying on the queues? So they were people, the fathers with a heart condition, diabetic, serious condition. They just fell dead on the queue. These were preventable deaths, but they had to stay for hours to get the gas cylinder, to get the petrol, that quota. So it's a lot of things that, and they're still trying to
Did not know
recover
that.
from the
I
crisis.
did not
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's one thing. And then of course we had more and more whistleblowers coming in, which is another great thing, because if you are an anti-corruption organization and a civil society, you would want people to trust you, especially if you are a whistleblower, vulnerable as a human being. And in the context we had, you'll be dead scared to, go ahead. But you should know, okay, but I can trust TISL to take my information and they will do the needful. And we had like an influx, but we saw this trend after the Aragalaya, the popular people's uprising. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much of enthusiasm. And then with this case also coming in, we had a lot of people coming into TISL or writing to TISL or contacting us with information on grand corruption, not petty corruption, grand corruption in big institutions. And they were willing to give us a lot of documents, but they just said, just protect the identity. And in court, you can do it that way. You can say, protect the identity, and we take the responsibility. We can take more risks than an individual, of course. I do have the backing at that time, the backing of the Transparency International Global Movement also. So, the government will be think twice. Because, for example, I was ready to be arrested. But my team knew that if that happened, they had to immediately have a press conference.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
we're not going to go quiet about it. So it's
No,
like
of course
another
not.
diplomatic mess. Then I've
Of course.
spoken
That's
to
right.
the
That's right.
diplomats and
That's
others to
right.
support us. So
And what are they going
this
to
is
arrest you on? Corruption charges? Like, I mean,
another achievement I'd quickly like to mention is
yes, please.
the collectively done governance diagnostic assessment, civil society governance diagnostic assessment, to become like a challenging document for the IMF governance diagnostic assessment. Now, I am hearing that they are yet to see this kind of initiative from another region, a civil society initiative to kind of in response to an IMF deal. Right. So it was again several organizations, we TISL led it, and the others were not anti-corruption organization, which is I think also beautiful because otherwise if it's TISL is always talking about corruption, but we had sessions
Right.
for civil
Right.
society to make them
Right.
understand. You might be working for women, for environment, for against
That's right.
poverty, but
Agreed.
democracy. But if corruption is not uprooted, if governance is not fixed, nothing is going to happen. And that realization has also come post Aragalaya. So that's when these 5 other organizations came together. And when we did the governance diagnostic, and we were in consultation, not in conversation with IMF. So they started because we were very unhappy with their 2018 governance diagnostic framework. We said
Yeah.
this is wholly inadequate for a country that is having systemic corruption, which is gone to the extent of a thriving kleptocracy in state capture. And you're talking about some, real, they were like some decorations without fixing the main issue. Like I used to say, look here, the house is crashing. Don't talk about fixing a table or a chair. It's not going to do anything. The house is crashing. So,
Right.
so basically, and then for our launch, we invited the IMF officials, and when their diagnostic finally came out, because we are acutely aware that that's the document that will become, if at all, part of structural benchmarks and the IMF agreement, and
Yes, of
make it
course.
compulsory for the government. So the idea
Right.
was to influence that as well, but to have an organic, to have a sort of locally driven research done and a governance diagnosis that is owned by the locals and the citizens. Their diagnostic was so much better than the original conversation. They have even referenced our diagnostic saying, if you want much more in-depth, details analysis, please refer the civil society governance diagnostic.
Okay.
And even on topics like, if you look at their overview, like at the start, it's so strong that our government should have felt embarrassed, because things like civic space, democracy, these are things that IMF said we don't use those words, we don't talk about it.
Yep.
And we
Yeah.
continuously argued with them. We even gave them words finally. But however, our governance diagnostic captured that and explained how civic space suppression can become macro critical. So because IMF keeps saying we will only work on macro critical stuff. But,
Yeah.
if people cannot highlight corruption, and then can you see what corruption can lead to? economic crash. So basically, that's one achievement.
So
Yeah,
I actually feel very strongly that what you're saying is not only significant for Sri Lanka, but maybe a game changer for the world in terms of, you look at the public litigation cases you've raised, right? For all the countries that are on their 18th, 19th IMF agreement, it's not just Sri Lanka, right? The mismanagement, corruption are so much responsible for causing
exactly.
the economic crises, with the exception of Mozambique, for example, where there was a deliberate corruption uncovered as part of the Tunagate scandal. Have there been a lot of other cases where leaders of countries have been found to be by the courts responsible for having created the economic crisis? Or is really the presumption just that you just kick those people out of office and give them a pass? Like, are you familiar with, like, because I think the message you have a message here which is really global, right? And you not only have a message, but you have a precedent in your country that could apply elsewhere as well.
Yes, I am also yet to find a case where a country where, like, for a thing as broad as an economic crisis or a downfall or GDP, whatever growth, anything. I mean, to that level, a country leader being held accountable. But we had recent cases again of particular corruption scandals. Yes,
Mhm.
right? I mean, even up till recently, there will be here, and then they will name the commission, the project, and the president got so much, and but this is broad. This is a culmination of all of
Right,
and more. So it's quite unique, and I think very true, Jeff. The idea of why the court said, see, there was nowhere that it was found that any of these people who are found accountable took money. The simple version of corruption. No.
right,
See, it is deeper. You need to understand that corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. You don't have to always get money. So
okay,
if you put your people, for example, your family members into high position, that's corruption. You may not
okay,
get a
mhm,
cent, right?
mhm,
But
mhm.
so it's so to understand then the public trust doctrine, because in our part of the world, I think we are still, although we say we are democracies, our leaders can have campaigns saying, I come from the former king's generation, and that was accepted. We should be ashamed to talk about kings now. But this was kind of the former propaganda, of some of these leaders. So if that is that, maybe in Asia, some of these tendencies where family rule was normal back in the day, because that's how kings ruled. And now, whenever a politician, I mean, if he's killed, his widow comes, or definitely his children, one of his children come. And it's just considered completely normal. So in this culture, to say they don't own it, they are trustees, they are stewards, they have no right. You have the right. So, for example, quick example is, if when a politician builds, say, a mega nice, beautiful road, after many years, say, after having a terrible road, the people tend to be like, oh my gosh, you're
Right.
awesome. God bless you. Let's put your name onto that road. And this is what we've been trying to tell people in our conversation awareness, that it was his duty. He finally did his job. It's like the whole rights holder and duty bearer. People don't understand that they're doing their job. You don't have to praise them when they do their job. If they don't do it, that's actually wrong. So
Okay, I got
it's
to tell you the
incredible.
most ridiculous analogy to that. Going to a baseball game in Canada, in Toronto. Okay, those baseball players are paid millions of dollars, and they catch the
Yeah.
ball, and everybody cheers. And I think, okay, the millionaire caught the ball. That's why he's being. I'm sorry to interrupt. It was such a ridiculous story, but that would be my very rough parallel. But on a more serious note, I think what you're raising is very important. I used to do a lot of work in Russia many years ago, and I got my start working in the former Soviet Union. And it's very clear to me now that part of the nepotism is not just about making sure your family is promoted and gets advanced, but also having compliant people around you who are able to protect you from what you've done in the past. Is that something that is an issue in Sri Lanka as well when it comes to nepotism?
Definitely, it's called cronyism, It's not, nepotism is about family and relatives,
From
but cronyism is your people. So you'll have people from the private sector, different public sector, they are your people. They look after you from different angles. So,
right,
and you put your person to all these key places. From certain places, like say if it's a police, you put your person so that you're protected, from any kind of action. But if it's like a very lucrative ministry or a department, you put your person so that you get your cut. So it's actually quite shameful, but it is so normalized. It is extremely normalized that the conversation on nepotism, cronyism, and conflict of interest are three types of corruption that TISL has been striving hard to create a public discourse on, and we need to keep working on it because it's
right,
countercultural.
right. It's not you're not catching somebody red-handed stealing money. So it
Yeah,
seems like it violates maybe the spirit, but not the letter of the law, in a sense.
yes.
Um,
It can have much bigger repercussions, Jeff. For example, a usual excuse that our government has been giving over decades and currently giving to the IMF, World Bank, ADB, and other bilaterals when they ask them to do some kind of a sectoral reform or an institutional reform or a digitalization program or something, to enhance transparency, accountability, is that we don't have capacity. We don't have officials, we don't have expertise. Oh my gosh, we don't have a printer. Why is that? When you have a given an organization to lead and you have a country of highly educated people from
mhm,
all sectors who are even headhunted by other countries, and then
mhm,
yet, without going through a proper recruitment process to identify that talent, you have
right,
put your people and you have not got your house in order. So as a result, your institution lacks capacity because you don't want. You have not public sector, you have a proper system, but you have ignored the seniors. You have not even promoted them. You don't even have a performance evaluation system in our sector. Now they're trying to bring is part of the reforms that are suggested. So it doesn't matter whether you work in the public sector. You will get your pension till you die, and after you die, your spouse gets it. So you only need to get a job. Then you need to sign the attendance, what time you came, what time you left. As to whether you work was irrelevant in Sri Lanka.
mhm,
So this is where, so then that is why I'm saying that is also corruption because you put your people and conflict of interest, nepotism, cronyism, and now you cannot say I don't have expertise. And I've been saying this to the IFIs. Don't accept that lame excuse because you've been giving technical expertise to these organizations for decades. I mean, World Bank, ADB forever and ever. And for example, people like TISL, we had to sometimes go pleading behind organizations saying, give us the chance to help you free of charge. But no,
mhm.
they don't want. So if you need to have that intention, the political will we say?
On this, the civil society governance diagnostic, I mean, that was a big accomplishment. And as you know, the webinar that we're having on the 6th, um, the webinar that we're having on November 6th for the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, or put on by the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, focuses very much about the role of civil society in monitoring IMF
Yeah.
agreements. So, I think your accomplishment there was huge. And I think there's also, as you said, also a role to play in encouraging other CSOs, other CSO debt alliances, as you said,
Yeah.
to push back against the sort of orthodox IMF type of assessments. I'm surprised and pleasantly surprised to hear that the IMF would even give you a line in their
Yes.
report. They, at least to acknowledge the existence. Have you seen any other sign of willingness to change from the IMF since then? Are there future diagnostic models that are being put out? Have you seen that may be a bit more progressive, that have local buy-in? Have you seen anything?
Well, I think yes. Two things. So, from a before going to system change, kind of within the IMF, in terms of Sri Lanka and IMF dealing with our government, one thing is that from that very the starting conversations were not pleasant, as in it was very very open and but they took it well, the criticism well, but however, they've always wanted to engage and have continuous conversations. So we launched ours a few weeks after they launched theirs.
Yeah.
They've reached out to us, even one to one, and they've said, okay, tell us, what should we be doing next? Like, how can we push the governance agenda? How can we push anti
Wonderful.
corruption reform? Because
Wonderful.
I see that yeah, yeah. So, I mean, because even within the IMF, they have the anti-corruption governance colleagues. No, I think they themselves having to advocate
Right.
to prioritize that. And I remember once when the mission chief was visiting, and each time he visits, we are all this group that did the governance diagnostic are invited, knowing that we give them a year full. And we do have a very open, conversation. And I remember telling him, you need to respect your own governance diagnostic, right? Because it's not now ours. So most of our things, and like 80-90%, most of it was taken in. I mean, at least it was part of the IMF governance diagnostic. So now we are saying get the government to implement those reforms by
Right.
incorporating them as
Right.
structural benchmarks into your agreement.
Right.
And it has slowly happened. It has gone
Good.
to the extent of them making it a condition for our government to give an action plan on how it will implement the top 16 recommendations of the IMF
Good.
governance diagnostic.
Good.
Because they had 89 and top 16. So they wanted action plan for top 16, and giving that action plan was a benchmark. So our
Fantastic.
government put
Fantastic.
and then our government put out the action plan, and in the action plan they had to give like dates, because they were
Yes.
very very late on almost all the original dates were not a date. So now they put new dates and they have put incremental changes, and they've tried to stick to it. And so and the conversation continues, and they are very interested to take the conversation. Of course, I mean, whenever after the mission visit, before or the what do you call this, the iterations of when they give the money, I forgot the word they use. They do now they do a little press conference. That is something we push for. That you need to talk to the people, not just put a statement on your website in English that nobody in Sri Lanka knows or understands or looks at. So now they have a press conference. And the press conference, we have not been happy because, like, for example, if you're talking for 10 minutes, for 9.5 minutes, you'll praise the government for all the economic indicators and economic targets they have achieved. And maybe that last 30 seconds or 1 minute, you say, but you need to do a little better on the governance and, so we were like, come on, like, don't do that. Like, at least give us 1/3 of the time. Because then you buy the tone, people think that's not important. So
Right.
soon after their press conference, the president and the government will have a press conference to say, see, the IMF praised us, saying we are doing really well. Because who cares about the 1 minute about the
Right.
governance, So that was it.
Right.
And the second thing I noticed when at the spring meetings, the IMF organized a meeting for all civil society participants. And the purpose was to encourage the civil society to engage more with IMF and to tell them what are the different ways and means in their respective
Okay.
countries that they can engage. So now they're
Okay.
doing a presentation and they're showing sort of success
Okay.
stories. And, so they're talking about our governance diagnostic. And they're saying, look here. Yes. I was like,
Okay.
okay.
Okay,
So,
that's very
and they're
that's very
saying this is a very fruitful engagement we had, and they're happy. They're promoting other civil societies to do their own governance diagnostic and engage. So, don't you think there's some hope there?
well. I was going to wait till the end to thank you for the interview, but it's partly your optimism and your energy that is just so incredibly inspiring. So, yes, that sounds very optimistic. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is any sort of global civil society dialogue about, how to how to press your government to uh, ensure that, or how to advocate for civil society involvement in an in negotiation with the IMF, or how to monitor. This is maybe it's sort of regional or piecemeal. But it sounds like, because what the fight that you're having, that you had in Sri Lanka, and what you accomplished, if you travel to other countries in 5 years, you may hear that they've never heard about that somehow that knowledge
Yeah.
didn't get shared. And maybe that's one of the challenges, great brainstorming session in terms of, figuring out how you pass these lessons on to other countries, because you've accomplished, really, really great things. I did also remember my other question. I told you, I promised you I would remember it. It goes back to your broader definition of corruption. Have you gotten a lot of pushback on that broader definition? Either from the government or from the multilaterals, or somebody saying, whoa, your definition is too broad now. We have to narrow it down to just stealing money. Does anybody push back on that?
I wouldn't name, but
No.
there is
No, I wasn't
uh,
expecting you to name names. I didn't mean
yeah,
anybody.
very
I meant,
interesting. Yeah, so
what
very
type of
interesting.
organization?
Yeah, I would tell that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
very interesting that one would expect the government with the biggest accusation goes to the governments, But we haven't ever been challenged on that definition. They just, they don't try to engage on the definition. The only place where what you asked has happened is with a think tank, where even like so there were meetings, several meetings where few of us heads of organizations were invited, and important delegates either from say US or EU or some of the multilaterals, were coming, and we had to tell them what we thought about the country. This was last year. Things were very heated. And the situation, especially governance, corruption, and all of that. So here I am trying to give them the broader overview. And this person representing the think tank kept saying corruption is not the only problem. It's not the only reason why we had economic crisis. Fixing corruption is not going to fix the economic crisis. There are other things we have to do. And then
Okay.
I was so only thing is, and then the other things, and it has been said in few other forums by that organization. So when we go and find out what are the other things, then they say things like uh, the institutions, the public officials don't have capacity, they don't have expertise, the public sector is not efficient. Can you
Mm-hmm.
see, Jeff? I just explained to you that the fact that our public sector is like this is because of the broad definition of corruption. We have not wanted to fix it because I would those benefiting from a corrupt system fix it. So,
Mm-hmm.
actually speaking, the current president, the new one, says he's going to do an overhaul, a system change. And if they are actually going to do that, all hell will break loose. And I'm saying it not just like to be dramatic, but being part of TISL, I've read about what happens when people actually try to push back on
Sure.
kleptocracies and state
Sure.
capture. These are dangerous things.
Mm-hmm.
People have been benefiting from these systems for decades, and they are well connected to from criminal networks to big businesses to they have the tech, they have the money, and they are
Mm-hmm.
not going to tolerate anyone changing. People
Right.
have lost lives, anti-corruption fighters, right?
Mm-hmm. Of
So even
course.
in Sri Lanka, Like people have tolerated when they spoke on politics. For the moment some of these people touched massive corruption scandals, they lost their lives. So it's going to. I wish all the best for the president, and I hope he is committed to what he's saying, and the new government will. But it will not be easy at all. There will be a lot of sacrifice and commitment, and he needs all the support he can get. And one party that can really support that and bring a different element of protection would be the bilaterals and the IFIs, IMF, World Bank, because then that gives a power to the president saying, this is
Yeah.
part of IMF agreement. I
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
and to some extent, that gives a strength, some backing. They have
Yeah.
a role to play. And not to the problem here is that they were happy to tick the box when you do there is the letter of the law, spirit of the law. So you have the from the outside, okay, you were supposed to come up with a new law on public financial management. So you come up with a law. Then you say, wow, well done. Are you bothered to see what is in that bill? I mean, we ended up going to court on all of this.
Well, that's what
Because
I was concerned about when I saw that IMF tracker, right? You've got a tick box. I mean, it's a great idea, but like look at the anti-corruption law, for example, and some of the poison pills that were inserted into that. You could tick a box, but that doesn't really
poison
tell you
pills.
whether, yeah, right?
Good work.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, you've answered my question about the new president. I think we also tend to and I think we see this. Obviously, I live in Canada, so what happens south of the border in the United States, not just now, but in general. I mean, we get a lot of news from that part of the world, right? And it's a powerful position, but one has to recognize that there's power to do a lot of things, but the power of one person to even at that level to change an entire system and culture is very, very difficult. What else do you think has to happen for the change to come about in Sri Lanka?
So, couple of things. The cultural change has to happen, but I think that has started. Like the whatever the darkest moments for the country was like, say, the economic crisis, like
Yes, of
never
course.
before. But it
Mhm.
gave rise to the whole Aragalaya, the people's uprising. The message that corruption affects your bread and butter is a message that TISL has been trying to give to people for like 20 years. And they suddenly hear those protesting were holding placards saying that, you know. And after the case, actually last year, we had people making statements like, if the wife says today we have no meat, you just had to eat this bread. Sorry, not bread, it's too expensive. Say this rice with a little gravy. And they would say, this is all because of those people who crashed the economy. Now, they were connecting their dinner to those who rule the country. Now, that connection, we call
Yes.
it the victim distance, is often very far, and ordinary people don't make that connection. So, as corruption fighters, in part of our education is to reduce the victim distance, to show them though it's connected. Because also in Sri Lanka, there is a very famous statement in Sinhalese like that says, if you earn, you will eat. So in other words, it doesn't, point where the country changes, government changes, president changes. At the end of the day, I am the only one who can look after myself. Now,
Yeah.
that was challenged during the economic crisis because you may have had money,
Right.
you couldn't do your business, you couldn't drink, there was nothing.
Right.
So you
Right.
realize that you are not even allowed to live when the country is crashing. So I used to say, the people say we are not interested in politics, but politics very interested in you. So
Yeah.
all of those connections. So that we need to, many of us, not just TISL, but many organizations working in whatever sector needs to know that the momentum is there. Keep taking this message and keeping the public discourse there, not let it die down. to understand, to be interested in governance, to be interested in corruption, to identify, understand where are we contributing to corruption? Are we also contributing? And, when it comes to our things, are we willing to, pay bribes or ask for favors and things like that? That's one side of change. But another thing the president will have to do is like I think the tone from the top does matter, Jay. We've not had the tone
Sure.
from the top, like
Sure.
forever. So
Sure.
it's so interesting. I mean, we are excited to see whether at least now, before I die, I'll see the tone from the top. Now, right now, that's
Hopefully
what
long
they're
before that.
saying.
Yeah.
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 So, like, because the thing is, when the topmost person was corrupt, then there was no issue for the rest to be corrupt. So it's like a huge system.
Oh yeah.
Even like, and
Oh yeah.
and the amount of the bribe just increases. So it was so funny. It was like the lowest guy would say, there are the cheap alcohol we have. This produced in Sri Lanka. So those guys in those departments, you just have to give them a bottle, you say. You get it done. For the next level, you have to pay this much, then that much. And the higher level is a different thing altogether. A different kind of a favor. So it's how, because they know that the top person is corrupt. So, but if the top person, so two things, you had to show it by your action. Then you need very strong anti-corruption policies in all these institutions with whistleblowing policies and strict action taken for any violation. There, people should feel scared to be corrupt. Here, impunity was like normal. Unless you are a poor man stealing a coconut, then of course you'll be,
Right. Of course. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those changes will have to happen. You have multiple sectors, and of course, the long-term cultural change. We had to think of our children. So that's where the education system. So there's a conversation on it. Because, for example, from preschool time, you can teach basic concepts of integrity and corruption. These things are not there. Then we are a very religious country, as in we listen to our religious leaders. They get big seats in all these political rallies, and whenever a president takes his vows, he will get the religious blessings. So they need to use their platforms in Sunday school, to Sunday services, to whatever, to talk about things like governance, corruption, individual integrity. People talk about honesty, and we stop there. We don't talk about integrity, because that's when you do the right thing, even at a personal cost, even when nobody's watching you. So so we have to put it into the system, university education system curriculum, school curriculum. Public sector has its own curriculum for the officials. So there are several of these. So several long-term, short-term, medium-term things that needs to happen parallelly.
I have one last question for you, which is, what would you like to see from the next parliament? What is the number one thing you would like to see from the next parliament?
So many things. Number one thing, I would like to see a parliament that is with a good enough, like a government that is strong enough, but not too strong. So like a majority, but not 2/3 majority, because absolute power corrupts. A strong opposition, and parliamentarians who uphold their stewardship. So they are public representatives. Last year, that's why we called out state capture. They no longer represented people. Everyone knew that even the most horrendous piece of legislation, after it goes to parliament, gets passed. It can be against all our rights, like the online safety bill. You broke the social contract. I would like that social contract re-established, and people beginning to respect the parliamentarians again, because they are actually speaking for your real problems, and they are standing by principles.
So inspiring to talk to you. Your energy, and your passion and your optimism and your unwillingness to put up with any, as we say, BS is really deeply, deeply inspiring. Congratulations on
Thank
your
you.
4 years tenure at TISL. I can imagine it doesn't sound like you're retiring, so I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you in the near
Yeah, heart
future.
and soul not retired, I think.
No, I can see that, and you have a lot more fight in you. So I'm sure it won't be the last time we speak, but or we do an interview. But thank you so much, Nadishani Perera, for very, very inspiring conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for the lovely opportunity, Jeff, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Human Coined is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.